This podcast contains adult language and stories of true crime. If you don't like laughing, crying, or being horrified at the actions of other humans, this podcast is not for you.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 21, Part 2 of Resolved Mysteries.
Yay! Yay.
This is the show where we rewatch, recap, and give you the latest updates to cases featured on the show Unsolved Mysteries. I'm Carlin.
I'm Alison.
I'm Eliza.
And welcome to our show. As you guys know, for every review we receive, we donate $1 to a different organization, and this month's organization is the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, suggested by Beth H. If you would like to suggest a nonprofit for us to donate to and also support us on Patreon, you'll get access to ad-free episodes, 2 additional episodes a month, early access to listener short stacks, and goodies in the mail. Go to patreon.com/resolvedmysteriespodcast. Okay, so what are we talking about in Part 2?
Okay, I have the unexplained death case of Gary Simmons.
And then I have a fraud segment about Richard Condia.
All right.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right, so this is the unexplained death of Gary Simmons, and we jump back and forth in time, but the segment opens with Stack telling us that a Missouri bus driver named Tyrone Rollins was just hired as a bus driver in 1991, and there were like rock outcroppings behind the bus garage where he worked. And apparently those rock outcroppings just always gave Tyrone a weird, creepy feeling. Mm-hmm. And we see these rocks, and they don't look creepy at all. I would never think anything negative about them. They look like a very normal part of the geology of the land. Oh, sorry. And this is in the Kansas City area. So eventually Tyrone is creeped out, but then also very curious, and he decides to hike up in there and see what's going on, what's freaking him out, which is also a weird choice.
He had a feeling.
He did, I guess. But if he's scared, why did he go up there?
I mean,
he's brave.
I get it.
He's also brave. Oh my gosh, my cat is doing a very cute thing right now.
I can tell by your eyeballs.
It's cute. Okay, so he goes up there, and not only is he hiking around, but he discovers a cave that seems to be fairly hidden. And inside, he sees like crystal sparkly things on the wall. He's looking around with his flashlight. The reenactment shows him turning around and seeing a pair of boots behind him. And as he investigates further, unfortunately, he discovers a full skeleton.
Can you imagine?
Still wearing his boots, though.
The weirdest story. Like, what a random story.
Weird.
Yeah. I know.
I know. These rocks were freaking me out. I went to inspect them. I went into a rock cave. Of them. And then I found boots. And then there was a skeleton in the boots.
Is he a psychic? He's either a psychic or he is a murderer before he was born. I don't know. But
Or this is a movie.
Or when he was a child. So this is where we're going to go way back in time. The skeletal remains were proved to be those of Gary Simmons, who had been last seen in the 1970s.
Wow.
This is, again, 1991. Which, after Tyrone finds the skeleton, police reopened the investigation of why Gary had gone missing. Obviously, he was proven to be murdered.
Sorry, did they know right away it was Gary?
I think it took them time to identify him.
Okay.
But nowhere does it say how they identified him. During the 1970s, Gary had owned and operated a lucrative chain of gas stations. But his main hobby was horse trading, and his brother is a talking head on here and says that he thought that his brother really enjoyed horse trading as a way to relax and spend time with his family.
Not the way that I like to relax.
That's like podcasting to relax.
Mm-hmm. And yes, Gary's brother name is Jerry. So we do have Gary and Jerry Simmons.
Gary and Jerry and their horsey biz.
On October 14th, the day before he vanished, Gary had learned from a friend that a man named Tom Dixon had a purebred horse to sell for $30,000.
Is that how much a horse costs? Is that like the running cost of a horse?
That's what I thought horses cost like now. Yeah. So I think for then that was very, very, very expensive.
Wow.
But this horse had like apparently been raised from a colt by this Tom Dixon guy and, you know, that whole world. Who knows? But I think that's an important part of it. But even Gary, in the reenactment, you see a friend telling him about this, and they're both shocked at the price. Mm-hmm. So at the next day, Tom came to Gary's office, and the secretary's like, do you have an appointment? And Tom's like, oh, yeah, I spoke to him on the phone. And apparently they had spoken, and the secretary walks Tom Dixon back to Gary's office. And then shortly they both leave, and Gary does not tell his secretary where he's going. He just says that he'll come back soon. So then 15 minutes later, Gary calls his secretary and tells her to write a check to Tom for $30,000. Then at 11 a.m., very shortly after he called her, Tom, not Gary, comes back to Gary's office and says, hey, I'm here to pick up a check that Gary said you'll have for me here. And she's like, yeah, I have it, but he still needs to sign it. So Tom takes the check, and when he does cash it, it does have a signature on it. Some people are saying, well, that means that him and Gary met back up so Gary could sign it. But I don't see why Tom or someone could not have forged Gary's signature. Mm-hmm. So to me, that seems possible. Mm-hmm. So this is all taking place in like a very tight time frame, because at around 11:30 a.m., so Tom goes to Gary's office to pick the check up at about 11 a.m. At about 11:30 a.m., a cook at a truck stop restaurant 10 miles from Gary's office sees Gary alone, but he seemed to be looking or waiting for someone because he was like pacing back and forth from his table to the window and like looking out the window. And this would be the last time that anyone would see Gary alive. Then, just before noon, so right around that time, Tom showed up at Gary's bank with the check. And Gary called the president of the bank saying, yes, Tom's going to come and cash this check, so be expecting him.
It's so weird.
And that's fine.
Which seems weird because people think Tom had something to do with it. Mm-hmm. In none of these phone calls to the secretary or the bank manager does it seem like Gary's in distress.
Yeah.
And like the bank president knew Gary very well.
Oh,
and so
okay.
It seems like he would have heard it in his voice. Mm-hmm. Or Gary could have been like, don't cash that. Like he's coming. Because at that point, Gary was not with Tom. Maybe Gary was with other people working with Tom. I don't know. Gary says, yep, he's going to come and cash this check. And then the manager, of whom it says Gary was one of his best customers, approved the check and also asked if Tom was interested in opening an account with the bank. But Tom takes the $30,000 in cash and says, no, I have debts that I need to pay off, so I'm going to just take it all with me. I'll say the editing and like production of all these reenactments makes Tom look very, very guilty.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I assumed that he was guilty.
Yeah. The music playing underneath is very much like, look at this bad guy. The way the actor is acting looks like that. So then my very favorite part comes when around 5 hours after leaving the bank, Tom, who's got all of his money now, he drives to a salvage yard 11 miles from the bank, driving Gary's Lincoln Continental car. So he's not driving his own car. He's driving Gary's car. Gary's not with him. And the guy playing the salvage yard worker is incredible. Excellent acting. I think he is actually a salvage yard worker. I believe him wholeheartedly. So he's like, what are you doing with that car? And Tom's like, oh, it's not my car, but I do need to get rid of it. And he's like, can you flatten it for me? And the salvage yard worker does not miss a beat and is like, if you want to actually avoid like this car being able to be identified, you have to melt it. But the feds have been all up on us about melting cars, and they're like on our backs about that.
Because it's clearly an illegal thing. And if you're doing that, you're hiding something.
So then Tom's like, well, what do you suggest I do? And he's like, well, I think you need to stick a brick on the accelerator and drive it into the Missouri River. Oh. And Tom's like, okay, bye.
Thanks for your advice.
Now, I don't know how anyone knows this exchange took place because I couldn't find anywhere that...
Well, maybe the salvage worker told them?
Yeah, I couldn't find anywhere that the police went and talked to the salvage worker. That would be the only answer, though.
Mm-hmm. But then he'd be admitting...
Exactly. Why would he implicate himself? Yeah. And that clearly he has gotten rid of cars in the past.
Well, maybe he was doing it to be like, see, I didn't melt the car, guys.
See, I just told him to put it in the river.
I just told him to put, don't look at me. I don't know what happened once he left here. The car that he told me
was not his, but he needed to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm no angel, but I'm also not melting cars. I'm not doing it.
So the next day, again, Gary is not seen during any of this time. And then the next day, Tom was dropped off by a friend at a truck stop in a different vehicle. And Tom is never seen again.
What
ever.
Is this? This is a really weird thing.
It's so weird.
I didn't remember this case at all either. And when I rewatched this, I was like, what?
And Gary's body is found 17 years after they both go missing.
Yeah.
In a cave.
In a cave. Because Tyrone is a psychic. So 6 months after Tom and Gary go missing, on April 25th, 1975, Gary's Lincoln Continental is pulled from the river. So he did take the salvage yard worker's advice, but it didn't take long for the car to be found. But police had no idea what happened to him or Tom until Gary's remains were located in 1991. So there is not a lot of information about the investigation in the mid-70s.
Okay.
What were the police assuming? We have one detective on there who probably was not working on the case at the time because it's like 17 or 18 probably when this episode airs years later. But he sort of lays out the possibilities like either we thought that Tom and Gary went away together to never be found. Like that's what they would have assumed at the time, not having found Gary's body, and that they just did not want to be found. Or that possibly there was foul play with one of them, but they really didn't have like strong suspicions, it didn't seem like, towards Tom at that time in the 70s. Stack tells us that after Gary's body was found and then Tom was still never found, authorities then believed that Tom murdered Gary over a bogus horse deal. So like got that $30,000 from him. Either there was never any horse or he wasn't planning to give the horse to him. That's their best guess. So Tom, still never been found since 1974, is considered the prime suspect in Gary's murder, but has not ever been officially charged with the murder. And to this day, has never been located. No body, no Tom.
Okay.
Which I'm also like, who are these people? Gary's too. Who are their families?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only Jerry was on there as a talking head for Gary's thing, but like he said it's for fun to do with his family. So like Gary must have children too that lost their father and never knew what happened to him, but we never hear anything about them and I couldn't find them. And then Tom's family, like, what in the world? So there's a couple of other theories, though. During the 70s, Gary, of course, owned the gas stations. Well, during the 70s, there was the Arab oil embargo in 1973 and the oil crisis. So they hit all gas stations hard. And what a lot of owners had to do was buy black market gasoline. This segment was being filmed. Then while it was being filmed, Stack says someone found out that they were filming about this and came forward. So this witness, who we see on here, named Roy Hilton, says that he knew both Gary and Tom because he was also in the horse world, and he was actually at the stables.
I want to live in a horse world.
Oh, God.
So
Dream.
horse-centric.
He was at the stables and heard Gary making the phone call to his secretary saying, write up the $30,000 check.
So it was him.
So Roy saying that makes it sound like there actually was a horse deal because he went and like saw it and was like, yes, I'm going to buy it. So Roy thinks there's no way that Tom had anything to do with Gary's disappearance based on just because of the horse thing. He suspects that Tom was either used as like a lure by other people in like the black market gasoline world to kill Gary because Gary was going to testify to the feds about these black market deals that were happening.
Jesus. This is like a Coen Brothers movie.
Yes, that is so true. It really is. But then Jerry comes back and says that his brother was not involved in black market gasoline, but rather spot market gasoline, which he did have to buy from them. And it was out of government control as far as like gasoline goes, but it was not technically black market and it was not illegal to buy from the spot market for gasoline. And Jerry says like every gas station owner had to do it during that time. So Jerry does not think that it's a hit from the black market gasoline people. I think Tom did it. So this complicates the case even more because now it's either Tom, there's three basic theories. So it's either the horse deal gone wrong, maybe the horse wasn't like Tom described, or maybe there never was a horse, or maybe all of it was just a ruse to get $30,000 and kill Gary.
I do have a question, though, because if the horse was fake or not like he described, who would spend $30,000 on a horse sight unseen? He must have seen a horse at some point.
Yeah. Well, and Roy saying he did see him at the stables making that phone call makes it seem like he did see a horse.
Right.
But maybe he did see a horse and then still didn't gave the $30,000, never got the horse because he was killed.
Right.
I don't know. It also seems like a small world.
Right.
But if Tom did it, he went away and he never
he disappeared.
Was seen again.
But in the beginning, like in the beginning of this segment when they're talking about Tom selling this horse, it seems like everybody knows who Tom is. So why would Tom choose this person to do this like con on?
That's why people think that Tom was used to lure Gary, and maybe Tom also got killed.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so convoluted because it's like it's either Tom is the murderer or Tom was also a victim, which really adds a lot to what the story would be if Tom was also a victim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the bank manager saying Tom said, no, I have debts I need to pay off, also made it seem like maybe Tom was also indebted to these black market gasoline people too. I don't know. It's so convoluted. So I'll read a couple of Sitcoms Online posts. So someone says, I just rewatched this segment today and I realized a few perspectives missed out by myself and people earlier. First, from the bus driver's perspective, I thought the segment should or could try to explain why the bus guy was having the premonition feeling about the cliff behind the bus yard. Somehow it almost seems there's a supernatural linkage in this case where the ghost of the victim couldn't rest and reached out to the bus driver. And this is silly, but that does seem like an angle Unsolved Mysteries would take.
Yeah.
I feel like they were taking that kind of angle. They said like, oh, he was pulled to it.
Yeah.
They were definitely leaning into that for sure.
Yeah. So then they say, second, the segment failed to clarify, was there ever a missing report filed for Gary Simmons when he disappeared in 1974?
Yeah.
And then the secretary saw Gary Simmons and Tom Dixon leave the office together, and later she got phone calls instructing her to pay out Tom Dixon. Subsequently, when Dixon collected the check alone later, or when Simmons didn't come back for work the next day, wouldn't there be at least some suspicion aroused at all?
Yeah.
If there was a missing report on Gary Simmons and the police must have had questioned his secretary, if that was done, then wouldn't it be obvious that Tom Dixon would have become the prime suspect then and there? But there's like no information about the investigation, so we don't know how the police took it in the 70s. And then Anna Honda says, I have a theory on this case. Basically, it goes like this. 1. Gary Simmons was buying gas for gas stations during an oil crisis. The people I'm led to understand from my own research that he was buying it from were not very nice people, and I'm guessing may have been connected to organized crime. 2. Due to the fact that he simply couldn't afford to pay for the gas anymore, Gary closed down 15 or so of his gas stations within a year of his death, like prior to his death. 3, these same people who Gary was buying gas from were being investigated by Congress for their practices, which weren't strictly illegal, and it was speculated at the time that Gary might be called to testify.
Oh.
4, I believe Tom Dixon may have been tangled up with the same people, and I think they're kind of saying maybe for other things besides like oil or gas. His photos shown on the show are clearly mugshots. So he seems to have maybe had trouble with the law before.
Interesting.
Tom may have owed these people $30,000 and was told that he could have the debt paid if he lured Gary with $30,000 into a phony business deal.
Huh.
And then 6, once this was done, these people may have killed Gary and then possibly have killed Tom to ensure his silence and keep their money. Again, this is a guess. So, I don't know. Those are interesting theories, but I don't understand, like, who dropped Tom off at the truck stop. And he says, I'm getting on a long-haul trucker's truck. And when, in the reenactment, he's like, okay, guys, I'm ready to go. Like, he had already worked this out, but maybe that was, like, through an organized crime channel or something where they were like, these guys are going to take you into hiding or, I don't know. So who knows? And Tom's never been found. It's so crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's a convoluted
That's weird.
situation.
Well, and then the choice of putting the body in a cave.
Yes, and wasn't there something else about Tyrone, the bus driver, is basically like, it's a cave that no one else had ever discovered before until me? Or like people didn't know there was a cave in those rocks until I went in there?
Yeah, and they never said that he had to like squeeze through or like move things or anything. It just seemed like he just walked in there.
That's what some people on sitcoms online are like, how did Tyrone know? Like, how did he just have this feeling?
He just had deep cave feelings.
Deep cave feelings. So who can say, you know?
What a head scratcher.
So weird.
Yeah.
But once again, my dream to just walk in a cave and find a body.
Not my dream. Not my dream. No.
But then I need to be able to solve it. I don't want it to remain unsolved after that.
True.
My name's Brian Stratton.
And I'm Rob Milne.
And we co-host Marvel by the Month, a podcast that takes you through the history of Marvel Comics 1 month at a time. From August 1961 to whenever they decide to stop making these things.
It's like the best book club in the world, hosted by guys who thought they knew a lot more about this stuff before they started this podcast.
Look for Marvel by the Month wherever you get your podcasts or at marvelbythemonth.com.
All right. This is the last segment of Season 4, Episode 21. The segment begins with Stack in a warehouse reading from the want ads. He says, quote, wholesale medical supply distributor wanted. Investment of $18,000 minimum required for necessary inventory. Stack says that during the past year, this advertisement was placed in 90 newspapers all across America by a company called Fidelity National Medical Supply Incorporated. The ad seems to offer a perfect opportunity for enterprising individuals who have always dreamed of owning their own business. Who among us hasn't dreamed of being a medical wholesale supplier?
No.
Since I was a wee girl, It's all I've ever
wanted.
Fidelity National was based in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They extended an open invitation to potential investors to visit the company headquarters. One person who took advantage of the offer is a man who the show calls Robert Jones. He is interviewed in shadow. On January 24th, 1992, Robert Jones was driven to the company offices in a limousine provided by Fidelity National. Jones, who had arrived in town the day before, wanted to see the operation firsthand before making an investment. Jones says that he checked with the Better Business Bureau in Oklahoma City and there were no complaints. He also then had them checked out with a national credit firm, and all of the sources checked out, so he was satisfied that they were legitimate. Stack says Fidelity National certainly seemed impressive. Orders were pouring in, workers were busy taking inventory and answering a constant stream of phone calls. In the reenactment, one of the men is showing a map to Robert Jones, and it's all like lit up, and there's all these lines all over it. And in the background, the phone, it's like 10 phones ringing at the same time off the hook. It is the busiest office that has ever officed. So Stack says that the warehouse was equally impressive. Thousands of boxes were stacked behind locked doors waiting for delivery or distributors. So in the reenactment, too, they go to look in this big window and they see the warehouse. And the man giving Robert Jones the tour says, well, we can't let you in there because of legal purposes, because it's pharmaceuticals. And Jones is like, no, it's fine. I can see everything from here. And there's basically like just pallets and pallets of these giant boxes. Jones says that their financials indicated that they had $2.8 million or so of inventory in various locations. Stack says that Jones purchased distributorship for $54,000, his life savings. He was just one of more than 300 people who would make investments totaling $1.2 million. But as the money flooded in, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS became increasingly suspicious. Don't mess with the IRS. Don't mess with them.
Don't mess.
On February 17th, 1992, agents from the FBI, the IRS, and the Oklahoma City Police made a surprise raid on Fidelity National's headquarters. There's actual video footage, and it's super cool, of them doing the raid. And in the first part of the video footage, there's a man holding one of the boxes. And you can hear an agent saying to this other presumable, I think he's an agent, he says, quote, I can tell by you lifting 5 or 6 boxes at one time that there's nothing in any of these boxes that you can tell.
Empty.
Yep. And the man with the box replies, no, sir. So Bob Ricks, special agent of the FBI Oklahoma City office, says that when they went into the boxes, they found that they were completely empty. They found no evidence that Fidelity had in any way purchased, ordered, received, or shipped during the entire course of their business life. And Ricks is pretty upset about all this because he seems very angry. He is irate. George L. Fields Jr., IRS Criminal Investigations Chief, says that the inventory that was found when they executed the search warrants of the warehouse would sit on the side of his desk. Then they show more video footage so they had to open every single box in order to say that all the boxes were empty.
Yeah.
So there is just hours of video footage of these agents just opening empty boxes and then turning them over and showing the camera that the box is empty.
Yeah, there's one where the guy's just like throwing boxes.
Yeah, throwing boxes, like cutting boxes open and tossing them around.
Oh my God.
So they show more video footage of empty boxes being opened by agents, and Stack says that the investigators checked every single box in the warehouse. Every single box was empty, and the masterminds of the operation had long since disappeared. Bob Ricks says that these people are not amateurs, and they have obviously done this in the past. They knew what they were doing. They did it very quickly. They knew how to get in, they knew how to get out, and they knew how to set up accounts without putting fingerprints on the accounts. Rick says that they believe the leader of the operation was a gentleman named Richard Condia. then super weird. It just abruptly cuts to an update. Like there's no, I don't know. The editing was very, maybe. Yeah. I know. We don't know unless someone tells us on Sitcoms Online. So the update says that authorities determined that the key figures involved in the case were Thomas Alfred Flanagan and Harold Frederick Kruger. Both were convicted of conspiracy and mail and wire fraud and were sentenced to 9.5 years in prison, and they have since been released. So Harold Frederick Kruger was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, weeks before the story aired, but I wasn't able to find out how or why, and it bummed me out because I really wanted to know how they found him. On Thursday, August 6th, 1992, Thomas Alfred Flanagan, 46, was arrested without incident at an apartment complex in Atlanta, Georgia, by Bob Ricks, agent in charge of the FBI in Oklahoma. So Ricks got his man, and I love when the law enforcement officials on the segments get to take part in the apprehensions. I think it's so cool. So here's what an Oklahoman article from August 8th, 1992 says. Quote, the defendants are 2 of 3 people suspected of establishing an Oklahoma City-based scheme to sell phony medical distributorships to investors. According to an appeal file that I read, quote, the scheme was quite elaborate, involving the renting of an office space, hiring employees, renting a guarded warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence, and stacked with empty boxes bearing the Fidelity name, and also creating fictitious references complete with offices and telephones. So they had other phones in other offices that people would call for a reference, and then someone would answer the phone and say, yes, Fidelity National is legit. That's why this guy, Robert Jones, was like, I did my homework.
Oh, man, that sucks.
In order to reassure potential investors, provisions were also made to provide a, quote, company limousine to pick up investors at the airport and drive them to the warehouse, where they could see for themselves the extent of the resources commanded by Fidelity. And then the Oklahoman article states, Flanagan and Kruger are named in a 16-court federal indictment unsealed in the Western U.S. District of Oklahoma. The indictment accuses them of conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The defendants are 2 of 3 people suspected of establishing an Oklahoma City-based scheme to sell phony medical distributorships to investors, said Dan Vogel, FBI spokesman. The FBI has identified 140 victims of the scheme. The scam's chief organizer, a man known as Richard Condia, has not been found. Dan Vogel, FBI spokesman, said that the FBI believes that Condia, who was the president of Fidelity, has likely operated other cons. Quote, he got everything set up and insulated himself well from the people responsible for the operation in Oklahoma City. He's going to be difficult to locate. Condia got away with a large portion of the money, Vogel said. The investors paid more than $1.43 million to Fidelity.
Oh, wow. My gosh.
Of that money, $150,000 was recovered by federal agents, and another $166,000 had been returned by Fidelity, or investors had managed to stop their payments before funds were transferred, he said. The investigation revealed that $253,000 of investor funds were converted into gold coins. Approximately $364,000 was spent in operating costs. So, like, it costs a lot of money to run a scam like that.
That's what I was thinking. Like, the time, effort, and money put into even just setting up all those fucking boxes.
Yeah,
I know.
Like, it's a lot of work.
But then getting the phones, and you say this.
Yes.
They had employees. They had legit employees. $285,000 was paid in salaries and commissions to its employees. They're giving the salesman commissions for bringing investors in. A fake company.
Weird.
Yeah, and then the gold coins have never been recovered. Nick Lillard, assistant U.S. attorney, says, quote, if in fact Condia can be found, maybe additional money can be found. Fidelity had about 25 employees in Oklahoma City and between 30 and 40 salesmen around the country, Lillard said. Employees were told the company had medical supplies in warehouses in Mexico, Shawnee, and at the Will Rogers World Airport. At sentencing, Harold Frederick Kruger told the judge that the government was ignoring the major players in the operation and making him, quote, the fall guy. Kruger claimed that he was innocent and said that he earned only $3,800 while at Fidelity. After he was convicted, Thomas Alfred Flanagan appealed, and the story gets pretty out there. So, quote, defendant appellate Thomas Flanagan and co-defendant Harold Kruger were hired by Richard Condia at the outset of the scheme. Both Mr. Flanagan and Mr. Kruger participated in the initial hiring of employees, including salesmen. However, 1 month after the commencement of the scam, Both men were purportedly fired by Mr. Condia for alcohol problems.
Oh
boy.
At this point, the facts presented by Mr. Flanagan and by the United States diverge. Mr. Flanagan contends that he was ignorant of the fraudulent nature of Fidelity and that he had no further involvement with Fidelity after his purported firing. The government, in contrast, contends that Mr. Flanagan was in on the scam from the beginning and that after his purported firing, Mr. Flanagan continued to play an active role in the management of Fidelity's operations under the pseudonym of Barry Kent. Barry Kent was considered by the employees of Fidelity to be Mr. Condia's close personal assistant and exercised a great deal of control over the Fidelity operation. In one instance, Barry Kent communicated with the Fidelity employees only by telephone. The government presented evidence that the one instance where Barry Kent apparently visited Fidelity's offices in person, the visitor was really an imposter paid to play the role of Barry Kent in order to lead the Fidelity employees to believe that Mr. Kent was a real person. Mm. And here's the most bananas part of this. I found this on Sitcoms Online from the user Dark Dante. So we've referenced Dark Dante before. Quote, while the FBI had access to photographs of both Flanagan and Kruger, when it came to Condia, all they had was a composite sketch and a description of a man of average height and build who spoke with a heavy Spanish accent. Flanagan and Kruger were both eventually captured, but Condia has never been located, and authorities now believe he never will be, because Richard Condia never existed in the first place.
What?
It is believed that Flanagan and Kruger invented Richard Condia as an alias for both of them so that they would be able to have FNMS written publicly under a different name without having their names attached to the company as anything other than employees under the fictitious Condia.
Oh, my.
They believed that by doing so, it would clear them of any direct involvement in FNMS business matters. Indeed, a check with the Better Businessman's Bureau in Oklahoma City not only reveals the former location and defunct phone number for FNMS, but also lists the fictitious Condia as the sole proprietor. Mm. And this is my favorite part. Richard Condia's name itself. Because if you say the last name a little bit slower...
Condia.
Richard
Condia.
Stop it.
Dick Condia.
So many dicks recently.
So many.
Too many dicks.
Condia.
And I never say that. Just kidding.
Oh my God.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Do you think that was intentional, really?
Oh, I hope so.
I hope so, too.
Who can know, but we can only hope.
It's delightful. It's too delightful for it not to have been intentional.
Oh, man.
Uh-huh. So that's the story of Richard Condia.
Condia.
Wow.
I love it. That's fun.
Love it.
That's fun.
Mm-hmm. A frotty.
We love.
I know.
Well, we feel bad for the one guy.
Oh my God, we feel bad for the 140 investors to the
investors.
tune of
all of them.
$1.43 million.
Gosh, but their whole life savings.
I know. Can you imagine?
Hopefully they got a lot of paper cuts when they were making the boxes.
Well, they paid somebody to make the boxes.
Oh, that's right. They didn't even make the damn boxes.
Richard Condia doesn't even have fingerprints. I mean, fingertips.
Condia.
Condia. All right. Things to share. Things to feel.
All right.
What do we got?
Oh, gosh.
Carlin hates it.
No, I haven't.
She hates the second shares he feels.
I have it.
Well, I listened to some audiobooks that are related to each other. I only listen to audiobooks for my nonfiction content. I read fiction. But this way I can read more. I listened to A Promised Land by Barack Obama, which is his new book. It's volume 1, so it goes through, I think, his first term. And then the second volume will come out. But it starts from, like, his childhood a little bit. Like, into becoming a senator. And it's so good. And it's so nice to hear his voice reading to you. And it's like, it was depressing in a weird way because of what we know happens after his presidency, but then it was also like I don't know, comforting in the weirdest way too, of like, oh, we did have people who were all working together and trying to do a good job, and it will happen again and is happening a little more now. So, and I just love him. So
yeah, me too.
It was nice to listen to that. And then he referenced a woman that worked with him and then for him as when he was a senator, and then eventually she becomes his UN ambassador. So Samantha Power. And she had written a book about genocide called A Problem from Hell, because she was a reporter in the 90s reporting on like Bosnia. So she goes from being a Irish-born war correspondent to moving to America she moved to America when she was a little girl. She has the most amazing story. She becomes an American citizen, and she works her way up from being like an author, and then she goes to law school, and then she starts working for Senator Obama, and then during his presidency or his run for president, she has like a scandal thing that was totally a mistake but gets blown out of proportion, has to like leave his campaign for a while, but then eventually comes back and becomes the UN ambassador. It's just amazing. And is able to do like all this. She just sheds light on all these human rights things that other people hadn't done. And anyway, that book is called so her book about, I didn't listen to the genocide book, A Problem from Hell, but she references that. But this book I listened to is The Education of an Idealist by Samantha Power. And it's really good. And it's interesting to hear him reference parts of history that then like, and his presidency that then she's talking about from her perspective. And just how she was trying to like persuade him to act on certain like human rights issues. But then he, as the president in his book, has all these other things politically he has to think about in order to make those decisions. I don't know.
Wow.
Part of it's like really dense a little bit, but it was, so sometimes I'd find myself like tuning out, but it's still just like comforting to hear both their voices. And
yeah.
It's good.
Nice.
Recommend.
KB, you want to go?
Sure. Well, I've already blazed through the entire season of Queer Eye. I do.
Was it good?
So I was looking through some comments recently, and everybody says this is the best season yet.
Wow.
So this one, they started filming. They had their first hero. You know, they usually film the hero and the stuff they do, and then they check back in a few months later with like, oh, how's it going now? So they filmed hero number 1, and then the pandemic hit.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
So they have like a way later update for that one, and then the rest of them are really pretty focused on like heroes who, you know, deserved it in the first place, but were also majorly affected by the pandemic. And it's like them kind of like coming back after that and stuff. So it's very much kind of focused on pandemic recovery, but it's really good and so nice as usual. Just the nicest. They're just the best.
They are the best. And it's so nice how all 5 of them love each other so much. They were just cast in this show, and they all are so close. It's so sweet.
I know. And like, I think that's why it continues to get better and better, because I think I said last time, like, they're more themselves now. And like with this season, even more so. They're just like family, and I don't know. They just have some really, really sweet stories, and it's just the best.
Did you hear that Jonathan Van Ness has a show, Getting Curious now?
I did, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yes.
Nice. I have a recommendation. I just finished it yesterday. It's only 3 episodes. It's on Netflix, and it's called Crime Scene: The Times Square Killer. Crime Scene: The Times Square Killer. And it is about, as you guys know, and now I'm sure our listeners know, I'm kind of obsessed with New York City in the 70s and 80s when it was at its worst. And this is about a serial killer that I had never heard of that operated in Times Square during the early 1980s when it was just at its most destitute and like degenerate.
Horrific. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about The murders, of course, the women murdered were sex workers, so nobody cared. Well, that's not true. People cared because the murder was so horrific. The murders were so horrific. There were 2 women found in a hotel room. The hotel room had been set on fire, and the women's head and hands were missing. And then in another instance, a woman was found in a hotel in Times Square. I believe her head and her hands were missing, but she had not been set on fire. But then it's about like cross-jurisdictional communication, because then there are these things happening in Jersey. It talks to a couple former sex workers who worked at the on the Deuce at the time. One of them basically was almost murdered by this serial killer, and when the police talked to her, she wouldn't tell the police because she was afraid of what her pimp would do.
Oh my God.
The theory is that happened a couple of times, that women got away, but nobody would talk to the police. So subsequently, the murders continued.
Oh my God.
It's about sex workers in general and how vulnerable they are. And if we just legalize this, then there would be, ways to ensure their safety. And yeah, a lot about New York City in the late 70s and early 80s. And, I remember being a kid and walking through Times Square, and my mother, the mantra was, don't make eye contact. Just keep your head down and keep walking. And people calling to us, and sex workers, talking to me and my mom as we walked by. I mean, it's just and that was 86, maybe 87. But yeah, it's really good if you're interested in the seedier history of Manhattan. And I had never heard of it before, which is pretty wild for me.
Yeah.
So it was Times Square? What?
Yeah,
We
Times
don't know
Square.
about this?
Yeah, I know. And it relates to Jersey too, an area of Jersey I'm not that familiar with, but still I had never heard. Yeah, and it's only 3 episodes. So it's 3 hours. Pretty easy. So that's it. That's my murderous recommendation.
Gotta have one.
You got it.
You must.
All right. What are we covering next episode?
Oh, that's a great question.
Oh.
What do we got?
Wow, Carlin, this is exciting for you.
Oh, boy. The first segment is an Unexplained segment about Noah's Ark.
And then I go next, or I go second, and it's an Unexplained Death segment, and it's Tracy Wofford Bunn.
And in part 2, I have a Lost Love segment about Dolores Strad.
And then a missing segment about Colleen Wood.
All right. Well, I can tell that none of us has watched this episode yet, because we don't know how to pronounce the names even. All right.
We love you.
We love you.
We do love you.
Get your boosters. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Go to patreon.com/Resolved Mysteries Podcast if you're interested in supporting us there. If you subscribe at the $5 a month level or higher, you're going to get ad-free episodes, 2 extra episodes a month, and other goodies in the mail. To see photos we reference in the episode, follow us on Instagram at Resolved Mysteries Podcast and on Facebook and Twitter at Resolve the Pod. You can contact us at resolvedmysteriespodcast.com, resolvedmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, or at our P.O. Box, 14005, Portland, Oregon, 97293. Send us your stories for listener short stack episodes. If you want to email us your favorite unsolved mystery story or cold case or any nostalgia you have surrounding the show, send it our way because we love to hear from you. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like us, leave a 5-star review and tell a friend, or tell 2, or tell 3. Don't forget, for every review we receive, we donate $1 to a different nonprofit. On Thurgis. I
don't know which words you're mixing, but I like it.
Thurgis. Oh my God, that's a cute name for a Muppet. Okay. Thurgis. Okay, sorry. On Thursday, August 6th, 1992.
That's what it is.
Thursday, August combo. Nice.
Yes, August.